Well, hello and welcome to today's episode of the Demystifying Microsoft podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Taylor, and I'm joined today by my good buddy, Nick Ross. How you doing, Nick?
Hey, Nathan, doing well. Doing well. Happy to be on with you
Awesome.
guys here.
Thanks for jumping back on. You're a regular guest, and we appreciate all the time you give us. Um, Kind of threw you back into the rotation just because I wanted to talk about something that's coming quickly. Today, we're going to dig into Microsoft pushing all tenants through a migration to the modern multi-factor authentication flow. So, our goal on this podcast is just kind of keep relevant and interesting details about Microsoft top of mind and walk you through things you're going to want to know. And this is going to impact a lot of people. So, Nick, if you don't mind, just jumping in, let's talk about it. What is changing September 30th of this month, 2025? Microsoft deprecating legacy multi-factor authentication. So tell us what's changing here.
Yeah. So classic Microsoft, an announcement they probably made 2 years ago now, right? Back in March, where they were like, hey, we're gonna, there's a new method. There's new ways of managing, what authentication methods people use for multi-factor. And we're gonna switch you over, pretty soon. And then pretty soon turned into 2 years later, now we're finally coming to the end of support lifetime, motion of it. But effectively, if you've been managing Microsoft tenants for a while, you've known that we used to always manage MFA through the per user MFA portal in the admin center, right? So very
Mhm.
legacy times, we'd go in there, we would configure, enabled, disabled, enforced for the MFA settings, and we go into the service options and we configure things like, do we want to allow for app passwords? Do we want to have some trusted IPs that we leverage as well too? Maybe where users don't have to use MFA as an example. But also within there is where we would define what types of MFA can somebody use. Is it SMS text? Can they get a email? Can they go, use the Authenticator app to get a push notification or an OTP code, that they could leverage as well as, for that as well too. And then we also had the concept of self-service password reset and being able to choose 1 to 2 methods, that you could set up to use that the user could register to say, if you fulfill these and you get them correctly, you can reset your own password. And so those were 2 different locations technically to manage that. And along that point in time, they've done all this stuff like rename Azure to Entra and, all the various things that confuse us. And in the midst of that, they also created this authentication method section within Entra as well too, where you really can manage all of your, authentication method settings. So basically saying, does our organization allow for Microsoft Authenticator? And if so, I can configure who actually can register for that and what types of settings that they would see as part of that as well too. And so over time, if you did not do this migration to the new settings, it would respect the new settings first, but then it would also default back to, are these other legacy settings turned on? And I think that's where I had a light bulb moment of thinking, oh, yeah, this is why if you disable SMS in the authentication methods policy, but you still have it turned on, for self service password reset, that user still has an option to register that, when they go to set up a multi-factor authentication method. And so this is basically, this migration to kind of summarize it up all the way to the highest level is basically saying they're deprecating those old ways of managing authentication methods in lieu of doing this one new method that's an Entra. And in doing so, there's not a huge impact, but it depends, right, on your organization and how you're
Yes.
managing this today. So that's kind of the top level. We'll unpack the weeds, but wanted to pause there.
Yeah. And it's like you said, it's kind of these multiple layers of things. And most of us who have been admins are grateful we're not in that old authentication portal. And I'll pull up the screen here. I'll pull up on our demo 10 minutes and kind of walk you through what that used to look like and talk through kind of the changes. But I remember trying to figure out how we were going to deploy MFA across thousands of customers using that old portal and checking every box. It was brutal. You had to go enable it for each account. And, um, so I think this is really focused on those authentication methods and what's approved. And there's some really good things coming with this, right? By default, Microsoft is enabling things like Passkeys, FIDO2 keys, the more advanced Microsoft Authenticator solutions. And most tenants don't have those enabled. And I think those are becoming business critical things to have. Your sensitive accounts should have, you should be considering putting an authentication strength policy for your more sensitive accounts, your admin accounts, your executives, your accounting people. You need that phishing resistant, token stealing resistant authentication. And it's not available to most people now. And so I think that's a big win that comes out of it. So I'm excited about some of that. But I think it does also kind of drive, though, there are, I think, some edge cases where it puts people in a spot where it's really important that they go back and review their posture. Because I do run into tenants where people are really still relying on user by user legacy MFA enablement. And I think those people are in a bit of a more precarious position now that this migration is happening. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that the per user enforcement is not going to necessarily go away, that portion of it, right? But
Yep.
the ways that you're configuring those other methods are going to consolidate. And the biggest end user impact I can see that's going to, ripple through potentially is if, in this new alignment, you have a bunch of users that have only registered a weaker form of MFA, like SMS, as an
Yes.
example. And when you go through the migration process and use their tool, they have that actually turned off by default because they're saying this is like a much weaker method. It's much more susceptible to attacks and just getting breached, with things even like SIM swapping as an example. So they're going to recommend that you turn that off as you migrate. And if you do, the user then the next time they sign in would be requested to set up a stronger form like Authenticator or whatever you've configured to be their default method, as part of that. So it's gonna ripple through, but I also think it will bring this spotlight on, when's the timeline when they start to actually deprecate these other settings as well too? Like the larger impact would be if they deprecated, hey, you can't, say that a
Mhm.
user's this enforced anymore. You got to either use security defaults, you got to use conditional access policies. With the preference, obviously, if you want any flexibility, to be
Yes.
conditional access, as part of that.
Yes. And I think that's a key call out is if you don't have a well thought out defined approach on security policies. And I think a lot of people are just like they're still using their tenant. I just set this tenant up 10 years ago. I just use it. It just functions.
Right.
But it's like, I always say conditional access is like firewall rules for identity. You'd never run a firewall just wide open and default settings. You go through and you start to tweak it. You say, hey, no, we're not letting anybody in and we're going to limit what these things can do. And I think there is a moment here where it's a great reminder that if you haven't, put a proactive thought into what your conditional access policies are, you're really in a dangerous spot. And I know your tool highlights this on a number of levels where whether your tool or the Microsoft security score recommendations of, hey, you really need to have 3 or 4 conditional access policies. It's the right way to run a tenant. You should have MFA enforced for everybody and have a policy that does that. You should have MFA enforced for admins as a separate policy because you want multiple layers of enforcement on MFA on admin policies. And you probably should have a higher strength authentication requirement on those admins. It should be requiring FIDO too. And you should have an MFA requirement for Azure management. And I think you want to get to the point where, hey, you have legacy auth blocked and those doesn't have to be 17 policies. I think you've got a really good article on your website about what the base level conditional access policies looks like. But I think most companies should end up in a spot where there's 7 or 8 conditional access policies around compliant device and MFA and enforcement of different things. And your sensitive accounts, you may want them to hit 2 or 3 policies every time they log in, just so you have that layered security.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's a staged approach. You can get more and more strict over time if you need to, but also just taking a look at the landscape of, where do your users work from, right? Is a basic question you always typically want to ask. Who are those users to your point, right? Are they CEO members? Are they admin accounts? What is the perceived risk, that we can start to think about from our attack surface that we'd look at complementing with a conditional access policy. But I do think that this is also like whenever these events occur for Microsoft, I always like to shift it from crisis mode, if you will, of like,
Hmm.
oh crap, I've got to go fix 100 tenants and I've got to go, figure out like the scope of whatever Microsoft's saying here into well, what's the opportunity I can get out of this? Which is to say, well, with this, it's a great opportunity. I think you were commenting on this earlier. It's a great opportunity to try to get, our users into stronger forms of multi-factor. Like conditional access. You don't even have to get into the weeds of just this being an authentication methods policy, but saying Microsoft's changing these things and we've been delaying this for some time. And now is a good time for us to move into conditional access because of these changes, right? It provides you an anchor, it provides you a foundation to lead with a story versus like, we just need to do this because, we're
Yeah.
doing it. So it gives you leverage, to have in those conversations, but also even at a more micro layer to step them up into those stronger forms, like FIDO2, passkeys, things that have evolved greatly in the past years, versus what they used to be
Yeah.
years ago too. Even the basics of number matching with Authenticator, right, is another great example of,
Yes.
well, that goes beyond just a TOTP or a push because we have things like MFA fatigue, right, that have
Yes.
gone up quite significantly too.
And I think you can vouch for this much as I can. We are here in September of 2025, and in the last 2 months, the identity attacks have exploded.
Yeah.
Phishing attacks, token stealing, and phishing attacks are just going crazy. And these things are becoming more important because some of those token stealing attacks, if you're not running the right settings, there's not a lot of defense against them. They take that token and they're off to the races. It's very difficult to protect against unless you're doing FIDO2 and compliant devices and some of the things we've talked about in previous calls. So it's a really great time to really highlight this and focus on it. Nick, if you don't mind, I'm going to pull up the portal here
Yeah.
and let's go look at some of these screens and just talk it through. All right, so this is one of our demo tenants. And I think it's worth kind of talking through some of this because I think sometimes some people are very visual learners, and I think it's worth talking through. So this is a tenant, a demo tenant where we do some testing internally. And the old multi-factor authentication pages was originally accessed here on the users page in the admin center. You
Yep.
click on this, and it now redirects you to the Entra portal. This used to be in the admin portal, but this is now moved over to the Entra portal where it belongs. And so this is where we could go and do the legacy, enable or disable MFA on a user by user basis. Now, I think everybody agrees, this is not the way to manage MFA. This is going to cause you a lot of trouble. And this page is what's really being migrated away from, right? That September 30th change, this is being deprecated and will no longer function, will no longer apply, is
Yeah.
basically what this migration is saying.
Specifically, yeah, that verification option section. So technically, they're not actually deprecating the ability to like create app passwords yet
Okay.
or set the IPs in that sense as well, even though obviously you should try to move that into conditional access as well.
Yes.
As part of that as well and not remember users' devices, skip multi-factor authentication, even if you're on a trusted network, in my opinion.
Yeah.
From there, but after you go through the migration process, these options will actually go away under the verification side.
Got it. So on this side, this is access. This is the policy we're talking about here. It's
Yep.
under intro.microsoft.com. You click on authentication methods and it takes you here. Right on the top page, you get to see what you have enabled on the tenant.
Mhm.
And if it's a tenant that hasn't been modified, this is going to look a little differently than this, where you're going to have a bunch of no's at the top and a bunch of yeses. And it's this button right here that you, for the next week and a half, you can still come in here and manage it. And it's pretty well worded. They say, hey, pre-migration, this policy only applies for authentication. Legacy policies still apply. You can switch to migration process, which uses this policy on this page for authentication and self-service password reset, but it will respect legacy policies. And then migration complete will take you to where the legacy policy are completely ignored. And I can go through the automated guide because actually the automated guide is pretty cool and it's worth talking through. So
Yep.
um, we'll click that button. I should roll this one back because it was already migrated. And so I didn't know I could roll it back. So I thought it'd be fun to run it through here. But this kind of talks you through. It gives you some links to learn more information, which can be helpful if you're not familiar. This is one of those topics that I do recommend my most common troubleshooting tool, which is if you have questions about something in Microsoft land, go ask Copilot Chat. the answers it's giving about Microsoft stuff are just stellar right now, and I just find it super useful. But I do like this UI because it really helps us talk through the authentication methods. We've talked about this before. Microsoft's showing you kind of the level of security that they prefer here. And we can go look at the auth strengths page as well a second after this. But we've talked about this before. If this is really an order of what you want to be using, voice calls are really low security. SMS has a lot of flaws. Now, know a lot of companies where they can't get rid of SMS because there's just a set of users that aren't going to run Authenticator app. You're not going to get them on a FIDO key. It's really hard to get them off of it. And in those scenarios, I recommend having scoped conditional access policies that say, we're going to require a stronger authentication method for most of our users, but this subset of users, maybe they work on a factory floor, they're frontline workers kind of thing. Maybe you enable SMS for those specific scenarios. I actually think the worst one on here is email one-time passcode, because I
Yep.
think it's kind of the easiest threat actor location. They modify your Gmail account, they get in your Gmail account, they reset your password, they can do the OTP, they can really kind of navigate through your commercial, your work account really easily through a personal account, and those get breached regularly. So I think, to me, that's definitely one that I wouldn't want enabled. So what are your thoughts just when you look at this? Things come to mind for you here, Nick?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, that one, like you said, everybody's Gmail is like really susceptible. And if they steal that and they say, hey, go send me an email to my Gmail account, then they can just move quickly right into your work email
Yes.
and so forth. So definitely would turn that off as part of these settings. But yeah, I mean, I think this would be a great time even to start communicating to clients about passkeys. In Microsoft, because they go beyond the typical YubiKey experience now, where you have a lot of financial overhead, for those
Yes.
devices. They're very prone to be lost, not maliciously in any case, but just lost
Yep.
from your users. So they have to have overhead in the sense of your processes to help support that from just them being able to log back in. And then you need, the capabilities of just the user training, right? That goes into, hey, this isn't familiar for you, but you're going to stick this key into your laptop and you're going to touch it with your finger. It's a biometric on it and so
You got to
forth, even
remember
though
another PIN code.
yeah, another pin. It's not your Windows hello, it's not your password. But
Mhm.
we could even start to use Windows Hello for Business actually is a great one even for this to get users acclimated to something that they're pretty familiar with, which is just showing their face. Albeit I do hear a lot from MSPs, that users get confused when Windows Hello is not working about their PIN versus their password and so forth. So it creates its own support burden, but with the new passkey experience through the phone that you would have connected and have the passkey located on your phone, it's still a little bit clunky in my opinion, but it's much better, than those other methods for those purposes too.
I agree. I think it's a much improved experience, and I'm with you that I think it's got much more possibility than the YubiKeys to be adopted in mass. I just think the average user is just going to go, wait a minute, I have to carry around this key and plug it in and touch it and no pin. Like it's not hard, but it is a layer of complexity. Whereas I think the passkeys through your Authenticator app on your phone are just an improvement. And we're seeing passkeys start to show up in places like Coinbase and 1Password, and Google's doing passkeys on your Gmail account, and you can do passkeys on your Outlook.com account. And I think the consumer side is allowing people to get comfortable with it. The hardware OAuth tokens, the software OAuth tokens, those are both things that have their place. They're obviously medium security. Where those can be nice is software OAuth tokens can be really helpful for like third-party support teams. A lot of them use a software OAuth token for their authentication for like a shared admin account. And
Yep.
we won't debate shared admin accounts on the call today, but I think those are a reality in a lot of places, and it's way better than a push to SMS or a push to email. So those are valuable. The hardware OAuth tokens, I think, are really great for frontline worker scenarios. I know a lot of people who go, hey, I got people in a warehouse, they don't have phones, I need to MFA them. Those hardware OAuth tokens are the old school, like RSA style keys, and you can buy them for $30 and you can put them on a lanyard for somebody and they can still authenticate without a smart device. So they're useful. You know, obviously Authenticator app is a no brainer, and we'll go look at some settings there. Temporary access passwords. Talk to me about temporary access passes, Nick. Where are those useful?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest use case I think I see for temporary access pass is on user onboarding, considerations where you want to be able to provide a secure method that's stronger than a password and more secure to transfer because you have more security behind it. Meaning, when you go to create one, you can say that it's for one time use. You could say it's for a time based window, as an example. So it's kind of like PIM, where it's like just in time access concepts being
Hmm.
driven, within there, and that is really powerful for those experiences where also I created a whole article on this too, but it's like if you want to have an approved work stream to know that you only get approved compliant devices onto your network, i.e. Entra, this is a great way because we generate, a specific temporary access pass for you to actually say you can join your device, into Entra, or you can register for Intune or something like that. That's the other use cases you'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is worth coming here and reviewing these. You could do one-time use. Maybe you're worried about, we've used these before with like people like, hey, I need to get in. I lost my device. This really allows you to use this tool, but not have it be, a big risk for you. So we go through up the list, of course. We got passkeys in FIDO 2.0. And so we'll go look at passkeys and authenticator settings here in a second because I think it's useful. But I'm gonna go ahead and hit migrate on this tenant. It is a demo tenant. So we're able to do it here live. And so now this tenant is really locked down to tap, authenticator, and FIDO 2. Those are the really only three ways you can get into this tenant, which is great. And the migration is complete. Now, I think the interesting thing about this migration, Nick, is I have one main concern here, and I'm very curious to see how this goes. But I'm with you that I think Microsoft's going to default this to a more secure set of options. But I'm curious if it drives a lot of users having to modify their MFA on October 1st. If we're just going to see a flood of just people like, wait a minute, why are all my users getting prompted to set up another authentication method? Um,
Yeah.
do you have a concern that that's going to happen as well across the millions of Microsoft tenants?
I do. I mean, I think that there's going to be a pretty big spike because even by default in that migration process you just went through, it turned off SMS, as an example. And like I was saying earlier, if you only have that, then the next time that user signs in, they're going to go, oh wait, like something changed. You need to register this. And that user may go through all the way through the process and scan a QR code and do all that. But we know a lot of those users are going to pick up the phone and call, help desk, their MSP, whatever it might be, in that situation. So I think it'll be pretty significant. I would hope to say that a lot of people have been on, well, it's two different stories here though, because it's like I'd like to say that a lot of people have been authenticator, but then when you look at the actual statistics, only 41% of Microsoft accounts have actually adopted MFA altogether, which is just
Yes.
wild in and of itself, right? So it's like,
Yes.
this wouldn't necessarily change that if you're not being enforced it today, right? But
Yeah.
still, I think that that speaks to probably the maturity of the norm, right? Of what people are using as far as MFA goes.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go look at these policies a little bit more. Let's go look at the pass keys. There's not a lot to configure in here. You can enforce some key restrictions and specific keys, and you can enable Authenticator. But generally, I've seen this pretty stable one. I think you can get yourself in trouble, especially if you enforce key restrictions on FIDO keys. I think you get
Mm.
too prescriptive here. There's such a big improvement with FIDO, unless it's a super sensitive tenant, and you really want to. Yeah, I could see if you had a tenant that you're like, hey, the security on this is important. We have 25 UB keys, and that's all we're going to have. And if we had the 26, we want to know when that happens. So we can keep track of them. Then you might go start enforcing this and getting GUIDs, global unique IDs. But I think in general, I would not mess with too much in here. Do you feel the same?
Yeah, you do have to set up one of these settings. I think it's at forcing attestation to yes. If you click on that in order to, or maybe it is in key restrictions. But it's for the passkey settings, yeah, where you can then, select Microsoft Authenticator, as part of that, which would then allow you to set up your passkey on your
Oops.
phone, with that as well
Okay,
too.
so you're saying this is these are new technologies even for those of us who are in it every day. So in order to do the Microsoft Authenticator passkey,
Yeah, you gotta choose that, and it'll automatically populate those for you. But that's basically
okay,
the GUIDs for iOS and Android, so
okay.
that you can set up the passkey on iOS and Android, as part of that.
It's interesting. Yeah, I think I'll have to look at some of the other tenants where I've set this up. I've been playing with passkey. I don't remember having to go too detailed in here, so that might be something I'll dig into some more. But definitely some things to play around with here. And I would say, as an admin, if you're an admin and you're not playing with passkeys on Authenticator app, you don't have a YubiKey, you need to have one. You should be using them personally. If you're not protecting your 1Password and your Gmail account with those, then you need to step it up and you need to be using them at work just to understand how they work, because I think it's important that you use stuff before you think about deploying it to users. Um,
Yeah,
uh,
I personally like to do the dual combination of a YubiKey and in the passkey. In case I don't have the YubiKey physically with me, then I can just use, for those of you that are familiar, it pops up a QR code that you scan, and then it looks for the passkey on the Authenticator app, for you to say, oh, like this is approved, and then you move into your sign in. So, um, it's good for the flexibility of like, yeah, unless you're hanging that thing around your neck or in your keychain or
yes,
something, then you have your gaps potentially, where you're not going to have the YubiKey with you.
it's a good call out, and I think the other variable there is if you already use YubiKeys personally or at work, then you either need a second YubiKey so you aren't locked out, because you're right, you want to leave one where you can't lose it, leave it in your safe, leave it at home, or the passkeys are a great workaround. And I'm similar. I use on a lot of apps, I use a passkey and a YubiKey, but then you kind of want to be careful about where you're storing that passkey. Is that something that's transportable, or if you're putting that passkey in 1Password, make sure 1Password is properly secured.
Right.
So which is not hard to do. Tools like 1Password are pretty securely designed, where you have to have the secret and the password and an MFA token. It's almost triple factor secure, but it's still key to keep on top of that. Um, I do like turning on these three things. Although
Mhm.
the third one not so much, but in the authenticator settings, I do like Microsoft enforced, I think, this for the number matching that got enabled on everybody. But these putting the application name and the geographic location can really help when you're getting, you know, authentication pushes you didn't expect, right? Maybe you got a device somewhere that triggered one. I've had that happen. You have a device at the office that you signed into and it reboots and all of a sudden it's pushing authentication. It's really nice to give people the data because it just lets them have one more sense of, hey, did somebody steal my password and trying to log in from a device I don't know? Um, and so I really like turning those two settings on. Have you played much with the Authenticator on companion applications? This is like allowing the Authenticator to run like Outlook. Outlook has a version, Outlook for iOS, and I think Android has a version of the Authenticator app in it. And for some orgs, they just don't even deploy Authenticator app. They just deploy Outlook and have the Authenticator in that app. Thoughts on that feature?
Yeah, I've used it. I wouldn't use it for the latter statement that you made of like that's your universal,
Yeah.
app for this is Outlook, because it's
Yes.
Authenticator Lite, right? It's a
Yes.
version of it, and it doesn't give you the capability to set up like other MFA codes that you were probably using for your work, most likely in a lot of these cases. It's nice in the sense that it doesn't do that thing if you're familiar with the user experience of if you sign into Outlook, it redirects you over to the Authenticator app and redirects you back, and you kind of go through this weird experience on your phone of going back and forth versus just getting the prompt in app and accepting it and seeing your mail from there versus the redirects.
Yeah.
But overall, I would not ever use it as a replacement for Authenticator or anything like that.
Yeah. Makes sense. Well, let's poke through a couple more of these portals and then we'll wrap it up here. Authentication strengths. If you haven't played with this is really how you can start to really drive that. Different levels. These then get referenced in your conditional access policies where, this is covers a lot of the options right there. This multi-factor authentication is just MFA. Basically, any option in here will qualify for this. So it's good to have at least this as a minimum. As you said, there's like 50% of tenants that don't even require that. So it's a big win if you're not doing that. That level is great. Passwordless MFA is Windows Hello for Business, FIDO 2.0, certificate based, or the Microsoft Authenticator. So this is where a lot of tenants can get to in a reasonable level
Yep.
of their. This is where you can get most of your users, I think, to this. And then your phishing resistant really means FIDO 2. So either certificate based, which can't really be hacked, you have to push those certificates, or it's a FIDO 2 or Windows Hello for Business. And I do think Windows Hello for Business is worth calling out. It's an undervalued form of authentication. You got your Edge running on your Windows device that's intra-joined and Intune managed. You turn on Windows Hello for Business. Any authentication it does is fully FIDO 2.0. So there's a lot of value in that because FIDO is so secure. But these then can be referenced in your conditional access policies, which is where you go and set your security. Any
Yeah, I
comments
think
on this page?
well that one's so powerful even for the very common attacks. Like the last video we did together was around the token theft and adversary in the middle phishing. And Windows Hello for Business could stop that, as you go through that type of an attack where some user gets emailed with a link and they click on that link and they're being redirected to what looks like a Microsoft login page. It breaks that attack down completely. So the user, one, doesn't have necessarily has a password that they have to put in, right? Because they're just going directly to authenticate or to using Windows Hello for Business, but no target token is ever harvested, throughout that incident either, as part of that,
Yes.
with adversary in the middle. So super powerful, for that kind of concept alone. Like I mentioned earlier, the only catch 22 is maybe the support burden, you get from that, comparatively speaking, just because of the confusion if it stops working on their Windows device, which it inadvertently does sometimes, where you need to restart or, it'll say, hey, we can recognize your face, you put in your PIN,
Yes.
and then that's where you start to get help desk calls.
Yeah.
So, but overall,
Yeah.
I think the security benefits worth those help desk calls,
No
right?
question.
In a workload
I
case.
think those have gotten pretty stable where
Yeah.
most of the, I mean, honestly, one of the things that happens now with Windows Hello for Business and the Authenticator app, passwordless, I've experienced this for years. The biggest issue becomes that once every 6 months scenario where you do need your password, you find something you actually have to sign into.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know my password. I don't remember it. I never use it. I use a Windows Hello Pen or a passwordless push or a passkey, these sort of scenarios. And that drives some support desk calls because sometimes people don't know it, or it drives you to the next section, which is it is worth looking at your self-service password reset settings here. It's a whole section here. It's worth reviewing what those look like. Now, Microsoft recommends that people use self-service password reset. Nix, what's your opinion on that? Because I know some people feel like they don't want this enabled because they'd rather people have to reach out to the help desk so that there's a chance to authenticate them. What's your feeling on enabling self-service password reset?
Yeah, I think he can be abused. I'm in the camp of I'd rather not have it on in that sense because I really would like them to reach out and we go through a formal, documented process when that
Sure.
happens. Because if we've,
Yeah.
I think it's with the intention in mind or the best practice in mind that we've already set passwords to not expire as well too, and we use complex passwords, that aren't
Yep.
summer 2025 as an example within there. So, I think if all that's taken into consideration, then I'd rather not use it, and especially not use it with things like, security questions that are also very
Yes.
susceptible to social engineering as well too. Where if you do, and you can still, this is one of the other aspects of this migration is that they're migrating all these policies out of here, but they're leaving the security questions available, and it's going to only be able to be configured here. So
Yeah.
again, I wouldn't recommend using them, but if you are and don't want to move away from them, this would still be the place that you're managing them.
Yeah, absolutely. And for some orgs, maybe you've got high turnover of frontline users and that you get a lot of ticket volume for reset. Well, maybe you come in here and you do say, no, I do want self-server password reset.
Yep.
and you do enable it, because it does have a material impact on your scalability, and maybe you've got higher levels of authentication on sensitive accounts, so people resetting their password has less impact on you because you're confident in that. I think before we wrap this up and close the portal, it is worth coming in here and talking about conditional access. Again, this is our test tenant, so we've got a lot of like test tenant policies we've pulled in from a number of things. We've got some of the Microsoft default ones, so this is noisy, but it is important to go take a look at this and start to understand this. You've got a great article on your website, T-365, about your recommended base set of conditional access policies. Recommend checking that out, Nick. So thanks for publishing that. I've actually been leveraging these a bit with some customers, these default templates. They're actually really good,
Yep.
because a couple of these are things that are harder for people to navigate. Hey, I want all my admins to have MFA. I want to secure how people are registering for multi-factor authentication. I want to block legacy auth. These are things, all 7 of these are things to really evaluate. I think the bottom 2 are more advanced features, but everything else, these first 5 are ones really should be enabled for pretty much every tenant. And the templates they have here are really great, really easy to deploy. They deploy in report only mode at first, so you can kind of see the impact. But I do think it's worth looking at these, and if you're trying to kind of navigate this tool, navigate conditional access, it could be helpful to have some of these built out. And then they have some more templates here the deeper you go. But it's pretty cool what they have built here in the templates. So
Yeah, I think I'd echo that in the sense of, it's a great place to start. It reduces your attack surface quite significantly, right? If you're doing just these policies, and you might need to tailor out a little bit further for more unique customizations to you, but that actually wouldn't apply maybe outside of maybe like legacy auth, or something like that. If you've got a bunch of printers and SMTP relay going on, you'd have to do some pre-planning with that. But otherwise, like, yeah, it's really good to have these already pre-configured, and then you just, customize them accordingly, and push them out. And these aren't ones, especially if you've already been adopting things like multi-factor, that should require a lot of end user communication, right? Too.
yes, yeah, I agree. The other thing they've done well in here is that there is more reporting there used to be in the portal now around impacted policies. You can kind of go do some previewing on their impact. So we're going to get too deep down the rabbit hole if I'm not careful. It's interesting stuff. I think it's going to be an interesting couple weeks here with Microsoft, making this change, driving this authentication methods migration. So be aware of that. If you're watching this and you haven't adjusted that, reach out to your partner. We're happy to help you if you see this video and kind of walk you through it, and help you get migrated. I think it's going to be a big win in the long term having a lot of these tenants have FIDO2 enabled and Authenticator enabled if they're not already. And I think kind of opens the door for a much improved security posture down the road.
Yeah, I think that's a good, silver lining, if you will, out of all this is, if you reflect on it, we've actually progressed quite a lot, in the sense of the security configurations and where we've moved to, right? Even security defaults, right? Coming in at 2019 has been an immense improvement, for people
Yes.
who weren't on anything before either. As part of
Yes.
that, it's unfortunate a lot of people would go, "Hey, let me turn this off if I don't have any
Yeah.
flexibility." But it's still moving the needle, right, in a positive direction. So
It is, and I think it's also a time for people to kind of evaluate if you're still running on like business basic licenses.
yeah,
Security defaults is about the only security you can enable, right? You're missing the licensing for a lot of the capabilities, and I think um, you know nobody would run without antivirus or a firewall, right? These are things that are just givens. I think identity protection tools for that are a core requirement in the modern world. There's just too many sophisticated attacks. So we really encourage people to check out Business Premium. It's an incredible value, gives you the ability to turn on so many of these capabilities. And now, if you're on Business Premium, you're like, hey, I want to take it to the next level. We've got all these Business Premium security suites now where we can bolt on Entra ID P2 and a couple other security capabilities for a really reasonable upcharge, another 40 or 50%, and you've got even more security. So definitely a great time to be a small business trying to secure your tenant. It's more cost effective than it's been in a long time, and definitely worth really digging into with all the attacks we're seeing.
yeah, yeah, really exciting news. we talked about this before, and they even reduced the price further of the E5 add-on, and they renamed it to Defender Suite just because it's Microsoft doing Microsoft things. But
Yes.
included Purview for E5 in there as well. So, yeah, definitely a lot in reach as far as getting enterprise grade protection, rolled out.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Nick, thank you for spending some time with us here on a Friday
Yeah.
afternoon. Tell people how they can get a hold of you, follow you, and see all your amazing content.
Yeah, you can reach out on LinkedIn, Nick Ross, Cloud Capsule, and then go to cloudcapsule.io, run a security assessment, and then I have a YouTube channel called T minus 365. It's all about Microsoft and in the SMB space.
Awesome. Well, your content's some of the best on the internet. We love it. We love your tool. Run Cloud Capsule on 3 or 4 customers a week. It's incredible. And we're always happy to help people run through that, walk you through what it's finding and help you remediate it. Big fans of the product. But thank you again for your time, Nick. Very much valued. And thank you all of you who joined and watched this video. This has been the SourcePass Center of Excellence for Microsoft, Demystifying Microsoft podcast, where we really try to take the mystery and all the suspense out of Microsoft's rapidly changing ecosystem. As we even talked about today, Microsoft released a bunch of new licenses in the last month. So there's a lot to keep up with, but we're here to help you really simplify that down. I know we did a video recently on those new SKUs. Wade did an awesome video on that. And I really try to keep the content fresh for our customers and partners. So thank you for your time. And hopefully this migration on these authentication methods doesn't cause anybody too much pain. And we'll know more in a couple weeks. So
Awesome.
awesome. Thanks, Nick.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Nathan.
All right. See ya.